Hi, everybody, and welcome back to my Zero Carb Life. I'm Kelly Hogan, and I am so excited to be joined by Dr. Elizabeth Bright. She is the thyroid, hormone, endocrine, adrenal guru that I have been dying to talk to for a really long time. Dr. Bright is an osteopath and a naturopath, and she's currently practicing in Italy. She's the author of the book, Good Fat is Good for Women. And I just found out she's about to become a grandmother. And for those of you who don't know, she also just shared with me that she is turning 60 in January, and you look fantastic. I love your book, and I love you. Welcome, Dr. Bright.
Thank you so much, Kelly. It's really nice to be on your show.
Thanks. I work with a lot of groups each month, and so many people have told me that your book was a game changer for them. The last I heard, you eat a total carnivore diet yourself. Is that true?
Absolutely. 6 years, and you are some inspiration for that as well. I went carnivore when I got menopause at 52. When I became menopausal at 52. I was low carb before that. I gained a couple of pounds, a few pounds, a couple of kilos, so 4 pounds, and I was still teaching. I'm also a Kung Fu master, and I was still teaching some students on the weekends, and pretty busy with practice, but still trying to do that to keep that going. And I just was tired and didn't feel as peppy as I usually do. And I increased the fat even more than I was eating already. I was eating low carb with pretty good amount of fat. I just took out the vegetables and increased the fat because I did a lot of research about menopause and was pretty upset about what I learned, which you can hear my tone in my book. So I realized that I needed to increase fat to give myself the hormones that I needed to enjoy menopause.
All right, so let's really dive in here. I work with 8 of my own groups per month, and I spoke to many of those group members to ask them, what do you really want to know from Dr. Bright? And I was really pleased with some of the questions. All right, so here's the first one. In all of your years of treating patients, is there ever a time when you tell the patients that they should eat less animal fat? And she went on to clarify, do you ever feel concerned or worried when a person says that they're eating butter, like even 2 sticks of butter or lots of animal fat trimmings, pork belly? Do you ever say, wow, that's a lot of fat, maybe we should cut back?
Never happened.
Never.
Never happened. Never happened. So after a patient of mine has been on a protocol, they may, which is usually 80-20, I do a specific protocol according to their height and their energy output and things like that. They usually come to feel if they need less fat. So if they need 70, I mean, I don't like to use numbers a lot because I really want the person to feel good. And if they feel better on 70-30, fine, they're needing less fat now. But then stress hits the fan. Relatives come over or they have a new job, and they usually tell me that they feel at that time that they need to increase the fat just to be able to handle both the energy required and to lower their stress levels.
Do you find that there's sort of a sweet spot in terms of fat grams? I've heard some people say that most women, especially when they're first starting to try the healing process for hormones, that at least 200 grams of fat per day seems to be about where people fall. But I don't know that I've ever heard you say that.
No, I haven't said that. I really just what I will do, I pretty much stick with an 80-20, maybe 85-15 if I see a lot of inflammation. I do spread out the fat throughout the day. So I will spread out the fat. I will have people grazing, say, on fat throughout the day. A lot of people with reactive hypoglycemia, blood sugar issues, depression, crashing in the afternoon, and fat. The amazing thing about cholesterol is that, be it butter, fat trimmings, whatever, tallow, is that it actually lowers cortisol levels if you have high cortisol, but it replenishes cortisol levels if you have low cortisol. So that's the beauty of it.
Oh, so that's part of the reason why you would never feel the need to say, wow, less animal fat. Because regardless of where those hormones are, it's going to be good.
Right. Right,
Okay.
exactly. And if you're not turning it into hormones, you're turning it into energy because you're in ketosis and we know that it's difficult to turn protein into energy. So it's not like it's not gonna, you have enough testosterone, estrogen, et cetera, it will, what is needed for energy will be used and the rest will just come out in your feces.
True. Yeah. Okay. All right. Here's what I've seen recently, and I've only really become aware of this issue in the past few months, this summer. Is that there are some women that in order for them to feel energized and to feel good, for them to see their glucose come down below 100 and their ketones start to come up some, they have found that they need to limit their protein per day
Yeah,
to around 65 grams of protein per day is what some of these women, and typically these are women who have been insulin resistant for a really long time or obese
yeah,
for a really long time. This is not usually like a 25-year-old who's weightlifting. This is normally like
yeah.
the 55-year-old who has had health problems since their whole life, basically. And so they
Mhm.
say, if I go over 65 grams of protein, that's just a ballpark for some of them per
Sure.
day, then glucose goes up, my ketones are low, and I just don't feel that good. But then we hear if you aren't eating at least 0.7 grams of protein for every pound of
Yeah,
ideal body weight,
sarcopenia, yeah.
then they say you're not going to get enough leucine in order to spark your mTOR to keep your muscle. So then they get scared and they're like, so is it either feel good or lose muscle mass? Are those my choices? I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Well, no, I think that feel good is you feel good, and then there will come a time when you're healed, and then you can worry about muscle mass. I'm going to be 60 and I eat 80-20 every day, maybe sometimes more. If I do, I'm a paddleboarder and we live right on the Adriatic Sea, and I go out in the waves and I use a lot of energy. If I don't keep the fat up, I won't have the energy to do that.
Yeah.
I'm building muscle.
Mm.
I mean, I've seen the more I do this, I just got into paddleboarding. I used to do kung fu. I have not had any, I mean, I'm not, I don't have huge muscles like I would get from weightlifting, but I'm muscular and I don't see that there would be a problem. I think that it's really important to heal and feel good. And then when you feel better, it's not a lifetime sentence of a low amount if they're concerned about that low amount of protein. I think that they need to get to the point where they are metabolically healthy, and then their body will naturally tell them, I want more protein. I want a bigger piece of that steak than I usually do.
The majority of people who are preaching about high protein diet so you can get your leucine and spark your mTOR are mostly people who look very well. They are mostly very young people who
Yes,
work out regularly, and they are
right,
the ones telling this other group of people, you have
right.
to get your leucine. And I'm
Yeah,
thinking we are two very different groups of people here. If you're insulin sensitive and healthy and you're lifting weights, you probably can eat a lot more protein. And so it drives me crazy when I hear, this group telling this group of women over here who have way bigger struggles at the moment than building muscle.
I call it sort of the jock docs. There's a
Yes.
whole community of jock docs, and that is, we're not rats, and women need more fat because we have to make more hormones. There are sexual characteristics it starts in adolescence, pre-adolescence, when we need all this fat in order to make these hormones, and thyroid function is really important for this process. I think that also there's a sort of an Instagram concept of what you're supposed to look like.
Yeah.
To me, I'm enough muscle for me because when I fall down, I'm not going to break. I can lift my 13-kilo paddleboard and carry it 3 blocks to the sea and paddle like crazy. My muscles are used. I need my muscles for use and for mobility and flexibility. I don't have 6-pack abs. I don't want 6-pack abs. I'd rather have a tiny bit of fat around my middle so that I have a hormonal reserve for when stress is really high. We have to have a small amount of fat on our body in order to have a reserve of cortisol, which a reserve of DHEA, of all those hormones that we turn into a stress response. So the very, very lean, cut, they don't handle stress very well.
Mm. And sometimes even in younger ages, they don't handle reproduction very well either. As
Oh,
far as
exactly. Right?
fertility. Yeah.
Exactly. Yes.
At one point I had lost my cycle, my period,
I know.
for about 2 years. Yeah.
Mhm.
And I did. I looked so thin that my eyes were kind of sunken in at the time,
Mhm.
wasn't having a period. And if you were to look at my stats, you'd say, wow, she is thin and healthy, but my body had
Yeah.
other things to say about it.
Mhm.
Okay, so in my own groups, this is what I've been encouraging them to do when it comes to figuring out protein amounts. And I would love to know if you think this is a good strategy. Just honest opinion, what could we do better? Is I've said to figure out how much protein you could handle, maybe start with 3 meals per day with around 25 to 30 grams of protein. So that might be, 4 ounces of leaner meat and at least
Mhm.
twice that many grams of dietary fat. So if they're
Mhm.
having 25, then at least 50 grams of fat per meal for those who like calculating. And I show pictures for those that don't, like this might
Yeah.
be what that looks like. And I send
Mhm.
them, meals, options, and things like that with the macros. And then what I had heard from Dr. Annette Bosworth, another keto
Yeah.
doctor, is she says that the next morning when you wake up, if you check your glucose and ketones, that is a really good indicator of how you handled or processed the food that you ate the day before. And so she says it's basically the GKI. If you take your glucose, divide by ketones, that ratio is then a good indicator of what your body is doing and if it handled it well. And
Mhm.
so I've encouraged them to look at that. And if that ratio is well above 100, then it was either too many carbs, which most of them are not eating carbs at all, or it
Right.
could have been too much protein. So they may want to pull back. And then obviously there are other things like stress and sleep that can influence that as well. Do you feel like that's a good starting point strategy, looking at those, your glucose over ketone ratio the next day? What do you think?
I would really go more by how you feel. I think that what your meal plan is fine. It's great. That's the amount of protein I give for my meals and my protocols, and that's amount of fat I give, but I have people snack on fat. So I might have a little bit less at mealtime because a lot of my patients have digestive issues because of their low cortisol or thyroid issues. So I'll spread that fat out in snacks. So it might be 30 grams as opposed to 40 or 50, but it's pretty much what I do is what you do.
I've been really surprised to find that when people go from standard carnivore, and what I would call that is just eat all the meat, mostly,
Yeah.
not mostly protein, but very high protein, where people just,
Mhm.
sit down and eat a pound of steak at one meal, a pound of steak at another, because that's what
Mhm.
carnivores were doing. Oh, and they
Mhm.
check their glucose and ketones eating that way.
Mhm.
Glucose was very often over 100 in the mornings, and ketones were very often at like 0.2, 0.3, and they weren't feeling good. I would never ask anybody who's feeling great to check
Yeah.
any of this, right? Keep doing what you're
Sure.
doing. Why would you
Sure.
prick your finger? You feel like $1,000,000, go live life. But when somebody's
Mhm.
not feeling good, I was like, just out of curiosity, I know a lot of folks already had these meters. Let's just see what it's looking like. Okay, so
Mhm.
that ratio, I mean, if you take that number, let's say it was 100 glucose, divide by 0.2 ketones, that ratio is 500. Now, what Dr. Annette Bosworth says is she in her clinics, she typically sees weight loss start to occur when that number gets to 80 or below.
Mhm.
Okay, so very quickly, I have seen people, if they start eating instead of 1 to 2 huge meaty meals,
Yeah.
3 to 4 smaller protein meals with
Right.
fat, that ratio comes down below 80. Usually, it's sometimes in less than a week.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
that whatever that dawn effect is, it's like it starts to dissipate.
Mhm.
I don't know. I was just curious if you've seen that or not, but I've been fascinated to see that happen.
Well, it's definitely an improvement on the fasting or eating one meal a day, or that's just going to lower your stress level. So I think that when your stress levels go down, your glucose levels just naturally go down and your ketones are going to go up. The metabolic stress that we put ourselves on, both the high, eat 2 pounds of meat, exercise a lot kind of carnivore, and is a lifestyle that raises stress levels.
Yeah.
Fasting raises stress levels.
I've heard you say you really don't recommend fasting for most women. No. Yeah. Do you ever use a fat fast, meaning for typically
I have.
1 to 3 days usually? Is
I
that about?
have.
Yeah.
I have. It's technically, medically, fasting is if you're not having carbohydrates.
Right. Okay.
Okay. So yes, medically, in the 40s and 50s, you didn't have carbohydrates. That meant you were fasting. But not eating water fasting, that's the horrible stress.
Yes.
Eating fat, you're making energy out of fat. So your body doesn't think it's in danger. So that's okay.
Yeah, Dr. Atkins was talking about fat fasting in one of, I think it was the second edition book many years ago.
Yes.
Yeah. And there are some people who say that they get very similar effects to when they were water fasting. Similar glucose, similar ketones, the similar high, the great feelings. Now, of course, you wouldn't want anybody fat fasting forever. We're going to need some protein.
Right, absolutely.
Yeah, 1 to 3 days, I think, was what he used to recommend. Well,
that's
cool.
what I recommended, 1 to 3 days, no more than that.
All right. Do you ever see women who cut out carbs, they go carnivore, and then they discover they have to do more, so they lower their protein per sitting and they up their fat, and they're doing this 80-20 approach, and they still can't lose weight, at least in the first month or so. So I think the question these women want to know is, now what? Do I just stick with this, power through? It takes more than a month usually. Or what would be the next step you would recommend for them?
Well, the endocrine cycle takes a month to change.
Okay.
Takes a month. Both male and female endocrine cycle works on a monthly schedule. I specialize in thyroid and adrenal function. So that's usually what is the problem at that point. If you have low cortisol or high cortisol, if you've been in a stress situation, your body will hold on to weight because it is keeping you alive from being in danger. It doesn't know that you're, specifically with fasting, for instance, if you've been fasting 3 to, some people do it for 4 days, or, do it repeatedly during the week, your body is going to say no, because it sees you starving to death. It sees you in danger. So it's going to say, no, I'm going to hold on to this weight as extra energy, as an energy reserve, just in case, because you're in danger. So that message, and it takes a long time to change that message, because if you've been dieting, yo-yo dieting since you were 15, which I certainly did.
Yes.
And you're now 40 or 50. How many years have you been under stress that your endocrine system has been trying so hard to take care of you the only way it knows how? So it won't let you lose that weight until you address inflammation, what's possibly a low thyroid issue or a cortisol issue.
So at that point, so if it's only been, say, a couple weeks, you might say, okay, look, we got to give that a little more time. But what you're doing as far as spreading out the protein, eating large amounts of fat, that's beautiful. Diet-wise, that will help everything. But then you would encourage people, especially after that month is over, if nothing is feeling any better, maybe to get thyroid panels checked, cortisol levels checked, go get some lab work, get under the hood, as my friend Danny Conway says. She's like, we got to get under the hood now. But with the fuel, you'd say, well, that doesn't mean we need to change the fuel. It just means fuel is good. Now we got to figure out maybe
fuel. You can't use fuel. If there's something, if there is an endocrine imbalance, you can't use the fuel. A lot of patients have, as I said, hypoglycemia. So you can't use the food you're eating. And when you eat, carbs is the worst, but when you eat, either fat or protein. Protein is worse than the fat. Your insulin response is going to be so strong that you're going to feel like you're going to pass out because you crash so low. Your glycemic index goes lower than it was than when you ate, before you ate.
Yeah, I was hearing all these carnivores saying I eat my steak and then afterwards I have to take a nap. I'm just so exhausted.
Yeah,
And I was
yeah.
like, what? That's not my experience at all. And it wasn't. I was
Mhm.
eating typically 6 to 8 burger patties per day, sometimes no added fat. That's
Mhm.
if sometimes I really did want some fat, so I put some bacon grease or
Yeah,
lard. Yeah. And
yeah,
then
yeah.
most of the time though, I was perfectly happy with that. And so it's really hard to then see people who are doing the same thing have completely different results. Like that's hard for humans to comprehend in any situation. But why?
Well, they've had different lives, different stress levels.
Yes.
We know that childhood trauma causes thyroid issues and, of course, cortisol issues.
Mm.
Back in the 80s, they were trying to put forth a new medical branch called psychothyroidology because depression and mental health issues are so much, they were related to thyroid levels. People knew that in the 40s and 50s. They talked about it. All the old thyroid books up until the 70s talk about if a child has been abused, trauma, it'll probably have thyroid issues.
Huh.
Yeah.
Okay,
So
I
you
had
can't use your fuel. If you can't, if your thyroid isn't working properly, your levels aren't okay, and you have cortisol issues, the fuel won't turn into fuel. So it doesn't matter. You've taken out the inflammatory fuel,
mhm,
absolutely, and that helps. But
yeah.
I always say 75%, but that last 25%, if you're not able to turn that fuel into energy and balance those hormones, because there's still stress in your life, we can't get away from stress.
Right.
I joke with my patients, if you can go to an island and somebody's fanning you and they're feeding you all the time and you don't have to do anything, then maybe that 25% over several months would take care of itself. If you're 30, not if you're 50, not if you're
Yeah.
60.
So the next step for a lot of people then when they do find out, oh my gosh, it is my thyroid medications is a pretty common.
Well, first we haven't talked about iodine yet. Iodine is
Oh
what you get
yeah.
thyroid hormones out of. And
Okay.
if you have low iodine, you're going to have low cortisol too.
I've
Most
heard.
people, I say everybody has to supplement with iodine.
Yeah.
Everybody. Because in today's world, there are so many pollutants and so many substances that interfere with iodine absorption that quercetin. So many people are taking quercetin. It's an it's a goitrogenic. It prevents you from absorbing iodine. So people are
Oh.
told all these supplements that are actually impeding their ability to absorb the non-existent iodine that's in our food. It used to be we had iodine from dairy because the cow's teats were cleaned with iodine, but then in the 60s they started cleaning with chloride, Clorox,
Oh my
bleach.
gosh.
Right. So no more iodine from the dairy.
Mm.
Bromide, we don't eat bread, but the people that do eat bread, all bread is treated with bromide. And these are halides. Fluoride is in the water and in the toothpaste.
Yes.
Chloride, they're all halides. They're the same molecular substance with one variable different than iodine. And they attach to the receptors that your iodine is supposed to attach to. So even if you're lucky and some iodine comes your way, it won't stick until you get rid of those substances. So that's why iodine is so important.
2% dark Lugol's, correct?
5%, I say 5%. I say 2 drops of 5%.
And you see that your patients, many of them do respond well to at least a couple of drops of the 5%.
Well, sometimes they need more. I have a whole protocol for iodine. I would never start anybody with 50 milligrams like some protocols do, but breast cysts disappear,
Mhm.
fibroids disappear. It's not just the thyroid that needs the iodine, it's the uterus, the ovaries, and prostate in the men. So if there's a deficiency, the thyroid's going to try to get 80%. The breasts are going to fight, breast, uterus, and ovaries are going to fight for the rest. What if the breasts win? and the thyroid doesn't get it.
I was taking 2 drops of 2% Lugol's for many
Mm.
months because I had breast tenderness, and it would
Yeah,
only go away if I added iodine. But then,
yeah.
Dr. Bright, I went to High-Fat Carnivore a little more than 3
Uh-huh,
months ago myself,
uh-huh, uh-huh.
and the breast tenderness was still gone, but then it used to be if I missed even a day of the Lugol's, I would feel it. Within,
Mhm,
like, 24, 48 hours, I would feel it in my chest. Well, I missed a day or 2, and I was like, "That's interesting." Well, now I haven't had it in a couple of months, almost
mhm.
3 months. It's gone. But
That's
and so
great.
now I've wondered, should I even add it back? But you personally feel like there's no reason not to add at least 2 drops? Okay.
No, I don't.
Should people take selenium with it? I've heard this discussed a lot of times. Is it safe
Yeah.
to take iodine without selenium?
Yes, it is, because the cofactors that people are talking about for the iodine to be synthesized are really only important for plant people who eat plants.
Oh,
SAD diet, standard American diet. You
okay.
need a tiny amount of selenium to convert your T4 into T3. It has nothing to do with the iodine. Selenium converts, selenistine
Mhm.
is what converts thyroid hormone, the inactive T4, into T3. And
Okay.
that's done by three different enzymes, D1, D2, and D3 in the body. It's done in all the tissues, it's done in the brain. Unfortunately, it's just another one of the reasons that people say, the doctor will say, oh, you're hypothyroid, take some selenium. I have not had a single patient who had high T4 and low T3.
Okay.
So if you needed more selenium, you would have high T4 and low T3, and that would be the answer.
Okay.
But that isn't, and the synthetic selenium, or rather what you get in the pills, is not as bioavailable as what you get in your food, in your meat. And you need a tiny amount of selenium to make this conversion possible. And selenium is actually a toxic mineral. It can be toxic very easily if you get too much.
Okay. So you worry far more about the selenium than you do the iodine drops.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I do think when people give recommendations on what is good, what is bad, if you're not talking to a doctor who has, first of all, worked with a lot of patients for a long time, and second of all, isn't very knowledgeable about carnivores specifically, they might
Yeah.
be addressing issues that are for plant eaters, even if it's keto,
Yes.
like they're still including a lot of keto plants. They're
Yes.
going to have,
Yes.
yeah, different needs. Yeah.
Definitely.
That's why I'm so glad you're here, Dr. Bright. You are a carnivore. You treat people. Carnivores are not. You know what we need. I love that. When you see people go maybe from standard American diet or maybe from standard carnivore diet, but now they're going to high fat version of this.
Mhm.
And so now
Mhm.
they're getting into deeper ketosis. Do you ever see people who feel worse before they feel better? Because I got to tell you, that did happen to me. Is that
Oh,
a
yeah,
thing?
all the time.
Yeah.
All the time. When you change, you got to think of, if you've been doing something a certain way, your body sees it as a status quo. Your body
Mhm.
says, okay, this is normal now. Let's all, even though it's not, something about it might be not healthy,
Yeah.
your certain physiological parts of your body are overcompensating. They're making more of this or more of that because you're not getting enough of that you need. And then you change your diet, all of a sudden the status quo has changed, and the people who workers in your body standing around, I don't know what to do with this. I haven't had this in so long. So maybe I'll just not know what to do for a bit and turn around and twiddle my thumbs until I figure it out.
Right. I tell people it's kind of like, I mean, when we first cut out processed foods, I think most of us felt shaky and awful. But does that mean
Yeah.
we should go
Yeah.
back to processed foods? That's crazy. No. And
Yeah.
so when I went high fat, I had a lot of upset stomach, even though I was very much almost 13-year carnivore, very
Yeah.
used to meat. I was not used to all that fat. I have adjusted. Now my digestion is much improved, maybe
Hmm.
even better than before when I was on doing standard
Hmm.
carnivore. I had days where I felt like I needed a nap all of a sudden, and I never napped before, but it was just, I guess, just adapting is all I
Yeah.
know. Yeah.
And healing.
Yeah, that's true. something in my breast was getting much, much better. And any type of
Mhm.
healing can take energy to perform this.
Well, we don't have the concept of convalescing anymore. You know, in the olden days, you'd go away for a week to Tucson and not do anything and be waited on. Well, people with money, you know,
Yeah.
or my mother would keep me home from school for several days if I had a fever because I was convalescing. I had to recuperate from being sick. So people need to add convalescing and understand that your body has to, while it's sort of figuring out what's going on, fatigue is a way for it to make you stop what you're doing and allow it to do the work it has to do.
Oh, that's beautiful. Yeah, I think when people do make a huge adjustment, it would make sense. Just listen, do it.
Sure.
Clear your calendar for a couple of days if possible to get some rest. Yeah, that I'm sure we would all heal much better if we did that. All right, let's talk about exercise a bit. I'm assuming you're not really big on tons of cardio running. That's partly why I lost my period was Charles Washington, another carnivore
Yeah.
like hero. He said, girl, your body thinks you're being chased by a bear 2 hours per day. You're not going to make a baby this way. I was like, okay, that makes sense. He said, sit down, rest, eat your meat. And I did. Weight training. I've heard some people say that if you are in a high level of ketosis and you have energy, that lifting weights when you're feeling good is actually pretty important. That it's pretty good for us.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so any kind of cardio after 15 minutes, your body is going to think it's being chased by a bear.
Okay.
15 minutes out, as soon as your heart rate is high for 15 minutes, it thinks you're being chased by a bear. So I always recommend stop at 15 minutes. Exercise. I mean, I'm somebody who used to fight people 3 times bigger than me in Kung Fu, and my adrenals, you know, I come out shaking, but boy, I felt high. And that was, I really damaged myself. I was a runner for a long time, you know, when I'm in my 20s, so a long time ago. I do not recommend cardio for anybody. You could get away with 15 minutes of whatever those machines where you're running on, but weight training is great because your heart rate does not, exercise should be for mobility, and literally when you fall down, you don't break. That's what the muscles are for. Flexibility, mobility. There's a bump on this road, where I live, there's a lot of tiles on the sidewalk that are, you know, they're made out of tile. So there'll be bumps and one will be uneven, and people are falling on these things and breaking their hips and breaking their shoulders. That's what you want to be able to have. That's what exercise is for. Not just that your muscles are good metabolic tissue, but flexibility is really important, and exercise gives you flexibility. So weight training, I think, is perfect. That's what I recommend.
Good. I currently do, I do a 10-second sprint per day, a whole 10 seconds, Dr. Brian. That's it.
That's fun.
Awesome. My husband and I, we take a walk up to the meadow, very casual. We're not like huffing it. We just walk and talk. And then on the way back, we don't quite race each other, but kind of for the last 10 seconds up the driveway, heart gets the beating. And then I have also just in the last couple of weeks started adding in some resistance training and weightlifting. And it's partly because I do have the energy now to do it. I feel really good. And I think eating this high-fat carnivore diet has added to that. And I do feel happier. I was already pretty happy, I'll be honest. I felt great. Standard carnivore, the 6 to 8 burger patties per day was working well for me. I was having 2 minor issues that I've talked about before. Every once in a while, I would feel a little ache in my lower back. And I had a fear that it was my kidneys hurting, but I was like, that can't be it. I didn't go get it checked, but it would go away. And then it would sometimes come back. It's like that. I don't think that's good. It's completely gone. I didn't go high fat because of that, but it is gone. And then I told you about the breast tenderness, completely gone. Those were the only 2 problems I was having. But in addition to fixing those things, I do feel other benefits. I am sleeping really well now. That got worse for a while. And then now it's gotten better. And
Mhm.
energy wise, I occasionally find myself thinking, I think I'm just going to do 10 push-ups. Well, I
Mhm.
didn't do that before. I had to like, oh gosh, I got to make myself do it. So that's when you
Yeah.
know energy is good, when you're not having to
Yes,
force it.
yes. Yes,
Yeah.
that's when you can exercise, when you feel the urge. That's really instead of pushing
Uh-huh.
yourself, shouldn't be a chore. It should be fun. It should be something that your body is healthy enough for you to be able to do it. It should not be this whole diet and exercise will keep you, for longevity. And
Yeah.
so a lot of people on the treadmill hurting themselves
Mm-hmm.
because they think they absolutely have to exercise, never allowing themselves to, as we said before, convalesce and heal.
Yes. Dr. Bright, I love you so much. I'm so glad you came to talk to me. Thank you. You just
Thank
always
you.
come across as a wise, brilliant, kind, well balanced. I, I just, I really respect you a lot. So thank you for your time today. And I'm sure a lot of people will be very much helped by this. And I hope to talk to you again soon.
Thank you, Kelly. It's great to see you.